The mansion stood silent under the cloak of midnight rain, its golden chandeliers glowing faintly, masking the tension that crackled in the air. A gunshot shattered the silence, echoing through the marble halls as the crime lord fell clutching his chest, his power crumbling in a pool of blood. His hand trembled, dragging across the polished floor, reaching desperately for a silver phone. He whispered into the darkness, "It's done. The king is dead." The final message flew into the night like a curse, sealing his fate. Shadows crept along the edges, whispers of betrayal growing louder, unseen faces watching from the dark corners of the estate. Outside, the storm raged harder, as if mourning or celebrating. The war had just begun, and the underworld shifted forever. The storm drowned the city streets as Detective Hayes leaned over the crime report, his cigarette glowing faintly in the haze of his cluttered office. The call had come in from the Romano estate, and whispers already spoke of power-shifting hands. He muttered, "The king's dead. That means chaos." His mind spun with the thought of Mafia Wars reuniting, each move now written in blood. Across the city, the Romano loyalists tightened their grip while enemies waited like vultures. Hayes knew the coming days would be drenched in violence, and he would stand in the middle of it all. At a dim bar in Brooklyn, Anthony Romano nursed a glass of whiskey. His face was tight, eyes burning with quiet fury. The news of Carlo's death had hit him like a blade to the spine. Around him, the bar hushed, every patron watching. Anthony growled under his breath, "Whoever did this will burn." He knew the vultures circling the family would strike fast, and he could not afford weakness. The war was here, and his blood demanded vengeance. In a smoky Berlin nightclub, Viktor Markov leaned back in his leather booth, sipping vodka with a smirk. His face was carved by decades of war, scars running down his cheek, cold eyes gleaming. Word of Carlo's fall had reached him faster than the storm. He chuckled. "The throne's empty. Time to claim it." Around him, armed men watched like wolves, ready to pounce. He knew the Romano family was vulnerable, and power never stayed unclaimed for long. In a modest apartment overlooking New York's rain-slick streets, Elena Romano sat alone, her trembling hands clutching a rosary. She was Carlo's daughter, the innocent heart tethered unwillingly to blood. Tears streaked her face as church bells tolled in the distance. She whispered, "Father, why now?" Her grief carried more than sorrow. It carried danger, for she was the pawn that both allies and enemies would soon covet. The war had claimed its first king, but Elena's fate might decide the war's final crown. Anthony Romano sat in the Romano estate's war room, cigar smoke curling around the ornate chandelier above. The air was heavy with grief and rage as lieutenants crowded the oak table, whispering about betrayal. Anthony slammed his fist, silencing them all. He growled, "Carlo is gone, but we're not broken. We strike back before they think us weak." His voice carried fury, but also desperation. He knew the vultures circled closer each minute. Every loyalist in that room felt it. A storm of blood was gathering, and loyalty could shatter with one wrong move. Anthony's gaze lingered on each man, searching for cracks. Detective Hayes leaned against his car parked across from the Romano estate, rain dripping from his trench coat collar. He watched shadows move behind curtains, men preparing for war. His partner muttered, "They'll tear this city apart." Hayes exhaled smoke, muttering, "And we'll be cleaning bodies till winter." He had spent decades watching mob wars bloom like poison, but this one felt different. Carlo's death was a fuse lit in dynamite. Hayes' gut told him betrayal was deeper than anyone realized, and he was caught between law and survival. In a smoky safe house, Viktor Markov's enforcer, Sergei Volkov, loaded his weapons in silence. Sergei, once a soldier, had no need for words. His loyalty was written in scars across his arms. Markov entered, smirking as he poured himself vodka. "The Romanos bleed. You will make them scream louder." Sergei gave a nod, expression cold as steel. He lived for orders, blood his currency. The war ahead promised him purpose, and he was ready to carve it into flesh. Outside, Thunder rumbled like drums of war. Elena Romano sat by the window of her apartment, staring into the city lights, blurred by rain. Her phone buzzed with messages she dared not answer. She whispered, "Father, I'm lost." Her world was unraveling, each heartbeat a reminder of blood spilled. A knock at her door startled her, her breath catching. A familiar voice whispered her name, the protagonist, returning like a ghost from the past. He stepped into the dim apartment, trench coat, dripping rain, eyes carrying storms of regret. Their reunion was heavy with silence, both knowing trust was fragile, but survival demanded alliance. The protagonist sat opposite Elena, the weight of his return pressing on both. She glared at him, tears forming. "You left us when we needed you." He replied quietly, "I came back because it's worse now." He carried guilt etched into every line of his face. Elena's voice cracked, "Blood keeps taking everything from us." He looked away, knowing she was right. Outside, sirens wailed, a haunting reminder of chaos crawling closer. Their fragile bond rekindled in grief, and yet it was the only hope left to survive the storm approaching. The study reeked of old leather and gun oil as Daniel Moretti eased the door shut behind him. Rain rattled the windows while a grandfather clock marked time like a slow heartbeat. He whispered, "Show me what you were hiding, Carlo." A portrait hinged open under his blade, revealing a narrow wall, safe scarred by pry marks. Inside lay a black ledger, a flash drive, and a key stamped with a star. Daniel said Capella, reading the coded heading that matched a name he had heard in whispers. The ledger mapped payments to shell firms inside the family's security arm. Boots creaked in the hallway, and dust shifted as if the house inhaled. Daniel killed the lamp and held still, counting the steps, heart-punching cold air. He slipped the drive into his coat and murmured, "If this is inside, we are already bleeding." Fluorescence buzzed over steel as Detective Hayes watched the slug roll under the examiner's gloved finger. The morgue smelled of antiseptic and wet wool, tracked in from the storm. Dr. Park said, 9mm, subsonic, clean jacket, dot. She added, "No rifling from street junk, this is professional." Hayes said, "Show me the wear." She pointed to microscopic striations that lined up like fingerprints. The pattern matched a suppressed weapon issued to mansion security. Hayes felt the case twist as if the floor shifted under him. He muttered, "Inside Job, or someone wearing their face." Dr. Park sealed the slug and said, "They had time and access." Hayes stared at the tag and thought, the first door was opened from within. The cash house screamed alarms as Sergei Volkov cut the breaker and kicked the door. Powder dust flared in his tack light like smoke from a cannon. Men scrambled over duffels while radios spat panic and code. Sergei said, "Drop it," and the room obeyed on reflex and fear. A runner lunged for the exit and met a steel boot to the ribs. Sergei knelt and pressed the muzzle under the man's jaw. The runner gasped, "Capella owns your boss." Sergei smiled without humor and said, "Everyone owns someone." He fired into the ceiling, seized the ledgers, and tagged the cash. Outside, a transformer blew and the block folded into black. The butcher shop's back room hummed with tired refrigeration and old knives. Blood traced dark curls into a floor drain, while Anthony paced tight circles. Daniel stood by the table, watching the courier shake against the tape. "Andy Poe." Anthony said, "Who paid you to unlock our gates?" The courier stammered, "A ghost with a family ring." Daniel's eyes cut to Anthony's hand and found the twin crest gleaming. He said, "The ring could be stolen or forged." Anthony stepped close and whispered, "Or it stayed in a traitor's pocket." The courier coughed out a code that matched the ledger thread. Daniel felt factions slide like knives behind a curtain. Wind harried the rooftop as Daniel and Elena faced the city's wet glow. Steam rose from vents and curled around their coats like breath. Elena said, "You think betrayal sits at our table?" Daniel answered, "I think it pours our wine." She placed a rosary bead in his palm, its silver seam catching a neon blink. Elena said. He hid things in small mercies. Daniel twisted the bead, and a microkey slid free like a secret. He said, bank box or a locker that bites. A siren wailed below, and rain pressed hard enough to sting. He pocketed the key and said, we move before dawn, or we become a headline. Rain smeared across the windshield as Daniel drove Elena through the hollow streets. The city was silent but heavy, as if holding its breath. Elena whispered, this road feels like exile. Daniel gripped the wheel tighter, voice steady but thin, it's survival, not exile. Neon bled across wet asphalt while the radio hissed static, cutting briefly with news of mafia retaliation uptown. Daniel thought of the key hidden in his pocket, a promise and a curse. Elena's eyes were glassy, reflecting fear she couldn't hide. The silence between them was worse than words, filled with ghosts of the dead. Anthony Romano stood in the chapel of his estate, candles flickering shadows against saints who offered no comfort. His ring gleamed as he clenched his hands, whispering to the icons, family is all that matters. Yet the weight of suspicion pressed heavy. The courier's words about betrayal gnawed at him like rot in the walls. He replayed Daniel's stare, sharp as a blade, doubting the crest that bound them. Anthony muttered, blood doesn't lie. But even he knew blood had lied before. As the candles burned lower, his face hardened into resolve. Family first, truth later. Detective Hayes sat in his car, recorder on the dashboard, watching Romano soldiers move crates into a warehouse. His partner muttered, evidence gift wrapped. Hayes shook his head, replying, that's bait, they want us to bite. Inside, shadows danced as men carried packages too light to be drugs, too precise to be cash. Hayes whispered into the recorder, shell crates, staged for eyes watching. He knew the Romanos were planting decoys, making law look like clowns. He muttered, and someone inside is feeding both sides. The storm outside rattled glass as betrayal smelled closer than truth. In a Berlin penthouse, Viktor Markov raised a glass as Sergei Volkov spread ledgers across a black marble table. Lightning painted the skyline beyond floor-to-ceiling windows. Markov chuckled. Romanos choke on their own lies. Sergei pointed to coded payments, linking Romano security to Capella. Markov leaned forward, eyes cold. That word returns like a ghost. Sergei said, a hand above all of us. Markov grinned. Then we cut off the hand or take it for ourselves. The storm raged outside, but the true storm gathered in his ambition. On the Romano rooftop, rain slashed sideways as Anthony confronted Daniel, eyes blazing with suspicion. Anthony shouted, you doubt me when I bleed for this family. Daniel's voice was calm, but steel. I doubt what I can't prove. Elena stepped between them, trembling, whispering, stop this before you destroy each other. The storm whipped around them, water soaking suits and faces. Anthony's hand twitched near his holster, Daniel's eyes never leaving him. For a heartbeat, betrayal and blood warred in silence. Elena screamed, enough! The family's cracks now split wide, and the city felt the tremor. The Romano dining hall was a cathedral of silence as Anthony raised his glass, family crest glinting in the candlelight. Around the table, lieutenants shifted nervously, plates untouched. Anthony declared, blood binds us but betrayal rots from within. Daniel studied him, heart racing, noting the same ring the courier had described. Elena sat stiff, whispering, we're breaking apart. Anthony's eyes burned, scanning each face, daring someone to move. Tension hung like a blade over the table, every breath thick with suspicion. For the first time, family felt less like blood, and more like a noose tightening. The safe deposit vault smelled of iron and secrets. Daniel slipped the tiny key into the lock while Elena stood watch, her rosary clutched tight. The drawer slid open with a metallic groan, revealing files stamped with government seals and offshore accounts. Daniel muttered, this isn't just family money. This is power laundering. Elena's voice shook. Father was feeding ghosts we never saw. Inside the folder, a name reappeared. Capella. Daniel's stomach dropped as he realized the Syndicate wasn't a family at war. It was a puppet show with hidden strings. Detective Hayes sat in his office, cigarette ash burning low, as the wiretap played static and betrayal. A familiar voice filled the tape. Anthony's, bargaining with Markov's men. Hayes muttered, "Son of a bitch, he sold them out." His partner leaned forward, stunned. "That's your traitor?" Hayes replayed the recording, every word cutting deeper. Anthony trading family secrets for promises of survival. Hayes knew exposing this would ignite war, but hiding it meant blood in the streets unchecked. He whispered to himself, "Which poison do I choose?" In a deserted rail yard, Sergei Volkov delivered crates to Anthony under a sky split with lightning. The two men faced each other in silence as soldiers exchanged briefcases under tarps. Anthony said coldly, "The Romanos endure, even if I cut my own blood." Sergei smirked. "Markov enjoys men who bite their kin." Daniel, hidden in the shadows, watched his suspicion harden into truth. The rest ring gleamed again on Anthony's hand as he shook Sergei's grip. Daniel whispered into the rain, "It was him all along." The betrayal now had a face. The rooftop confrontation came with thunder as backdrop. Daniel stepped out from the shadows shouting, "You killed your own brother for power." Anthony snarled, "Carlo was weak, and weakness is death." Elena cried, "You're destroying us." Anthony's pistol flashed, grazing Daniel's coat as rain whipped sideways. Daniel lunged, disarming him, rage boiling. The truth burned on Anthony's face, a mask torn free. Elena fell to her knees, sobbing, "We're already dead." In that moment, betrayal was no rumor. It was bloodkin, revealed under a storm that would never wash clean. The Markov estate loomed like a monument to greed, its marble pillars gleaming under cold moonlight. Gardens lay drenched in rain, fountains trickling like veins feeding a corpse. Daniel crept through shadows, pistol cold in his palm, breath sharp as he rehearsed the moment he had feared for months. Every step toward the doors felt like walking into judgment. Inside, golden light spilled from the windows, laughter echoing, Victor's victory feast, oblivious to the storm gathering outside. Sergei stood sentry, rifle across his chest, expression carved from steel, eyes sweeping the night like searchlights. Daniel muttered, "Tonight the Empire breaks, or I do." The estate's silence felt alive, as though walls themselves waited for blood. The hall erupted when Daniel burst through the doors, his pistol raised high, his voice cutting across gilded silence. "This empire ends tonight." Victor leaned lazily in his velvet chair, crimson tie blazing, smirk unfaltering as if he had seen this play before. He replied, "You came dressed for your funeral." Sergei swung his rifle, but Daniel's first shot smashed a crystal decanter, wine spilling like blood across the table. Guests screamed, scattering as chandeliers swayed dangerously. Elena appeared at the entrance, drenched from rain, clutching her rosary like armor. Daniel roared, "Leave, Elena," but her voice trembled, not without the truth. The hall transformed into a battlefield in silk and gold, war written in bullets and betrayal. Gunfire roared, echoing like thunder against marble. Sergei advanced, rifle spitting fire, tearing statues into dust and splinters. Daniel dove behind a column, stone erupting around him, lungs burning with gunsmoke. Elena screamed as shards rained over her, stumbling to cover. Daniel rolled out, returning fire, catching Sergei's shoulder, crimson soaking his sleeve, but the enforcer barely faltered. Victor clapped mockingly from his balcony, his voice sharp, "My wolves never tire." Daniel shouted back, "This empire isn't yours, it's Capella's shell." The words struck harder than bullets, Victor's grin faltering, eyes flashing cold fear. Elena cried out, "Capella was father's ruin, and now it is yours." The truth cracked the golden mask of the hall more than gunfire ever could. Daniel surged from cover, tackling Sergei in a collision that cracked tables and sent glasses exploding like stars. The rifle skidded away, leaving fists and fury to speak. Sergei snarled, "You're already dead," slamming Daniel into broken marble. Daniel spat blood, eyes blazing, replying, "Not until you stop breathing." Elena screamed, her voice breaking under the storm of fists. Victor laughed from above, cruel and calm. "Let beasts finish beasts." Sergei's hands tightened around Daniel's throat, but Daniel fought back with raw desperation, headbutting, striking until the enforcer faltered. Daniel pressed his pistol under Sergei's chin, hesitation burning. Sergei sneered, weak like Carlo. Daniel's whisper was colder than steel. "No, I'm nothing like him." The shot ended the monster, silence devouring the hall. The hall fell silent. Sergei's corpse sprawled like a monument to violence. Victor descended the staircase slowly, each step echoing like a drumbeat of judgment. Adjusting his crimson tie, his smirk returned, thinner but unbroken. "You think killing my hound makes you king?" His voice carried arrogance and venom. Daniel's pistol aimed steady, though his hand trembled with exhaustion, his soul cracking under the weight of choice. Elena stepped closer, tears shining under the swaying chandeliers, whispering, "End him or end this cycle." Victor sneered, "You'll trade one master for another. Capella's chains already bind you." Daniel's breath hitched, finger tightening. In that suspended moment, revenge, justice, and damnation collided. The trigger would not just kill a man, it would decide what Daniel became. The gunshot split the hall like lightning through stained glass, shattering the last illusion of power. Victor staggered backward, crimson blooming across his chest as he gasped like a dying animal denied dignity. His body struck the marble with a thud that echoed through chandeliers, still trembling from the chaos. The vodka glass slipped from his hand, shattering, mingling alcohol with blood, creating a sharp, bitter perfume of defeat. Daniel stood rigid, pistol raised, smoke curling like a serpent from its barrel, his eyes wide with the realization of what he had done. Elena whispered, "It's over." But the tremor in her voice betrayed emptiness more than relief. For Daniel, the silence was suffocating. It was not victory, it was the weight of a soul condemned. Rain hammered down as Daniel and Elena stumbled into the streets, their coats heavy, bodies bruised, faces hollowed by grief. The sirens wailed in the distance like vultures circling the carcass of an empire. Neon lights reflected in puddles, warping their images into twisted shadows. Elena whispered, "We burned the world for ashes," her fingers clutching the rosary as if it could stitch broken faith. Daniel muttered, "We didn't win, we just kept breathing." The street lamps flickered above, casting them in alternating flashes of light and darkness, as if the city itself couldn't decide whether to reveal or bury them. Their steps dragged like chains, each echo swallowed by a city that had grown too used to death. The safe house smelled of mildew, rust, and exhaustion. Daniel tossed the pistol onto a table covered in scattered files, the clatter echoing like a coffin nail hammered shut. The word, Capella, stared back at him from stamped dossiers, a reminder that the war they fought had only scratched the surface. Elena slumped into a chair, her eyes rimmed red, whispering, "We've lost everything, our blood, our home, even ourselves." Daniel's voice was low, cracked. "We killed kings, but their shadows still rule." The overhead bulb flickered, turning their faces into masks of light and darkness. Survival felt less like mercy and more like punishment, binding them to a world that no longer wanted them alive or dead. Dawn leaked pale light into the ruins of Victor's mansion, painting the carnage in muted gold. Detective Hayes stood in the wreckage, cigarette dangling from his lips, watching forensic techs bag fragments of shattered empires. Blood stained the marble like permanent ink, refusing to be erased by time or soap. Hayes muttered, "Kings die, but wars don't," his voice worn thin from years of repeating the same line over different corpses. His partner asked softly, "And Capella?" Hayes exhaled, bitter smoke curling into daylight, and replied, "They're still out there already writing the next chapter." The sun climbed higher, indifferent, casting light over a crime scene that reeked of history repeating itself. Daniel walked alone down a ruined street as dawn bled across the horizon, his silhouette shrinking against the skeletal skyline. His trench coat dragged like a burial shroud, soaked in rain and blood, while his eyes stared ahead with hollow vacancy. Elena had vanished hours earlier, grief pulling her into a void he couldn't follow. A payphone rang in the distance, its shrill tone cutting through the quiet like a summons from fate. Daniel stopped, shoulders sagging, watching the receiver swing like a pendulum of doom. He whispered, "The war doesn't end, it only waits for new names." As the camera pulled back, the city swallowed him whole, a ghost wandering streets built on blood, fading into silence that promised only more storms to come.